The sound of a child's scream pierced through the early morning calm of Oak Ridge Park, jolting Mason Keating from his quiet routine. He'd been sitting on a bench, reviewing his resume for the third time that day, when the cry rang out. Without hesitation, he stuffed the papers into his worn messenger bag and sprinted toward the sound, his heart racing. Mason spotted them near the playground, a woman kneeling beside a small boy who was clutching his ankle, tears streaming down his face. The woman looked distressed, her elegant hands hovering over the child uncertainly. "I can help," Mason called out as he approached. "I'm trained in first aid." The woman looked up, relief washing over her features. Her eyes, a striking amber color, met his, and for a moment, Mason forgot why he'd rushed over. She was beautiful not in the flashy way of magazine covers, but with a natural grace that seemed to radiate from within. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious concern. "He fell from the monkey bars. I think it might be sprained, but he can't walk." Mason knelt down beside the boy, who couldn't have been more than 6 or 7. "Hey, buddy, I'm Mason. What's your name?" "Noah," the boy replied between sniffles. "My daughter Lily took a fall just like this last year," Mason said gently. "Can I take a look at your ankle?" Noah nodded, and Mason carefully examined the injured ankle, noting the swelling but relieved to find no signs of a break. He glanced up at the woman. "It looks like a sprain, but he should probably get it checked out. Do you have a car nearby?" She shook her head. "We walked here. I didn't bring my phone either. I was trying to have a tech-free morning with Noah." She looked frustrated with herself, running a hand through her shoulder-length chestnut hair. "I can carry him to wherever you need to go," Mason offered, "or my car is just across the street if you want a ride." "That's very kind," she replied, visibly relieved. "I'm Grace, by the way." "Grace Porter. This is my nephew, Noah." "Mason Keating," he responded, carefully lifting Noah into his arms. The boy was light, reminding him painfully of Lily at that age. "I think there's an urgent care clinic about 10 minutes from here by car." "Perfect," Grace said, gathering Noah's small backpack. As they walked to his car, Mason was acutely aware of how shabby his 10-year-old Honda Civic would look to someone like Grace, who, despite being in casual clothes, a simple t-shirt and jeans, had an air of refinement about her. Her watch alone probably cost more than his monthly rent. "Sorry about the mess," he said as he unlocked the car, nodding toward the scattered crayons and small toys in the back seat. "My daughter's art studio on wheels," Grace smiled, helping Noah into the back seat. "It's lived in, I like that." During the short drive to the clinic, Mason learned that Grace was watching Noah for the day while her sister was at a conference. What he didn't learn was what Grace did for a living, though he had his suspicions based on her subtle indicators of wealth: the watch, the casually expensive sneakers, the particular way she carried herself. At the clinic, Mason carried Noah inside and helped get him checked in. He waited with them, entertaining Noah with stories about Lily's adventures and misadventures, making the boy laugh despite his pain. When the doctor confirmed it was indeed a mild sprain and recommended rest, ice, compression, elevation, Mason felt oddly proud, as if he'd personally diagnosed it correctly. "I can drive you home," Mason offered as they left the clinic, Noah sporting a new elastic bandage and using small crutches. "That would be wonderful, thank you," Grace replied. "We live in High Point Heights." Mason tried not to react. High Point Heights was the most exclusive neighborhood in the city, with homes starting at several $1,000,000. He'd done maintenance work there once, fixing a roof on one of the smaller mansions, and had felt out of place just being on the grounds. As they drove, Noah fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the morning's drama. "So," Grace said softly, not wanting to wake her nephew, "you mentioned a daughter." Mason nodded, a smile automatically forming at the thought of Lily. "Yeah, she's 8, the light of my life. She's with her mom this week." "You're divorced?" Grace asked, then immediately backtracked. "I'm sorry, that's personal." "No, it's fine," Mason assured her. "Yeah, for about 3 years now, it was amicable enough. We share custody of Lily." "And what do you do, Mason?" Grace asked. He hesitated. This was always the tricky part. "I'm between jobs at the moment. I was in construction management until my company downsized 3 months ago. Been picking up handyman work while I look for something permanent." He braced himself for the usual reaction, the subtle cooling, the polite nod that meant the conversation was effectively over. Instead, Grace seemed genuinely interested. What kind of position are you looking for? Project management, ideally. I have a degree in civil engineering that I finally finished 2 years ago. Took me a while, going to night school while working full-time and being a dad. He hadn't meant to share so much, but something about Grace made it easy to talk. She nodded thoughtfully. That's impressive, juggling all that. Mason shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Just doing what needs to be done. He changed the subject. What about you? What do you do? A small, almost secretive smile played on Grace's lips. I solve problems. That's vague, Mason laughed. I like it that way, she replied, her eyes twinkling. Turn right at the next light. Following her directions, Mason soon found himself driving through the gates of High Point Heights. The homes grew more impressive with each turn, until Grace directed him to stop in front of a stunning contemporary house with sweeping glass walls that seemed to bring the surrounding gardens indoors. This is us, she said. Would you mind helping me get Noah inside? My sister won't be home until later tonight. Of course, Mason replied, trying not to gawk at the house as he carefully lifted the sleeping boy from the back seat. Inside was even more impressive, minimalist, but warm, with art that Mason recognized from a museum exhibit he'd taken Lily to last year. The pieces had been labeled as on loan from a private collection. Mason gently placed Noah on a couch in what appeared to be a family room. Grace covered him with a throw blanket and adjusted a pillow under his ankle. Can I get you something to drink? She asked, leading Mason toward the kitchen. Water, coffee, tea. Water would be great, thanks. The kitchen was a chef's dream with top-of-the-line everything. Mason leaned against the counter, feeling increasingly aware of the contrast between them, his worn jeans and faded t-shirt versus. Whatever Grace's world was, she handed him a glass of water, their fingers brushing momentarily, sending an unexpected jolt through him. I can't thank you enough for your help today, she said sincerely. It was nothing, Mason replied. Anyone would have done the same. No, Grace said firmly, not anyone. Many people would have walked by or just called for help. You jumped in without hesitation. Mason felt his cheeks warm under her steady gaze. Well, I'm glad I was there. He glanced at his watch. I should probably get going. I have a small repair job this afternoon. Right, of course, was that disappointment in her voice. Let me at least give you something for your time and the gas. No, Mason interrupted, more forcefully than he'd intended. He softened his tone. Really, I don't want anything. I was happy to help. Grace studied him for a moment, then nodded. Then at least let me have your number, in case. In case Noah wants to thank you when he wakes up. Mason hesitated only briefly before reciting his number, which Grace entered into her phone. As she walked him to the door, there was a moment, just a fleeting second, where he thought she might say something more, ask something more. But the moment passed, and Mason found himself driving away from High Point Heights, trying not to think about the beautiful woman with the amber eyes who lived in a different world from his. 2 days later, Mason was replacing a garbage disposal for Mrs. Chen, a regular client, when his phone rang with an unknown number. Hello, he answered, wedging the phone between his shoulder and ear as he tightened a connection. Mason, it's Grace Porter, from the park, as if he could forget. Grace, hi, how's Noah doing? Much better, thank you. He's already trying to ditch the crutches, which is causing my sister no end of stress. She paused. Actually, I'm calling because I have a proposition for you. Mason raised an eyebrow, glad she couldn't see his expression. A proposition, professional, she clarified quickly. You mentioned you do handyman work. I have some projects around my place that need attention. Would you be interested? Mason considered. He needed the work, certainly, but something felt off about the request. What kind of projects? The deck needs refinishing. There's a leak in the guest bathroom, and I'd like to convert a spare room into a home office. Those sounded like legitimate jobs, not pretexts. Still, don't people in High Point Heights have contractors on speed dial? Grace laughed. Yes, but they charge triple because of the zip code and then send junior staff to do the actual work. I'd rather hire someone I know is skilled and trustworthy. You hardly know me, Mason pointed out. I'm a good judge of character, she replied simply. Are you interested or not? I'll pay your regular rates plus 20%. Mason couldn't afford to turn down work, especially at those rates. When would you want me to start? Is tomorrow too soon? The next morning, Mason arrived at Grace's house at 9 as arranged. To his surprise, she answered the door herself rather than having a housekeeper do it. "Good morning," she greeted him with a smile that did strange things to his chest. "Come in, I made coffee." Mason followed her to the kitchen, where she'd set out mugs and a carafe of coffee that smelled heavenly. "I hope you take it black," she said, pouring him a cup. "I forgot to ask." "Black is perfect," he replied, accepting the mug gratefully. "So, where do you want me to start?" Grace showed him the leak in the guest bathroom, which turned out to be a relatively simple fix, a loose connection that had been gradually worsening. As he worked, she hovered nearby, asking questions about what he was doing, seeming genuinely interested in understanding the process. "You know," Mason said as he tightened the last fitting, "most clients don't stick around to watch repairs." "I'm not most clients," Grace replied with that enigmatic smile that was becoming familiar. "I like learning new things." Over the next week, Mason came to the house daily, working on Grace's projects. The deck refinishing was a big job that would take several days, and he found himself looking forward to the hours spent there, especially when Grace would bring him lunch or sit nearby with her laptop, ostensibly working but often engaging him in conversation. He learned that she had traveled extensively, spoke 3 languages, and had a degree in international business. What she actually did with that education remained vague. She deflected his questions with practiced ease, always turning the conversation back to him or to general topics. On Friday afternoon, as Mason was finishing up for the day, Grace approached him with 2 glasses of lemonade. "I was thinking," she said, handing him a glass. "Tomorrow is Saturday. Do you have Lily this weekend?" Mason nodded. "Yeah, I pick her up in the morning." "The weather's supposed to be beautiful. Noah's coming over again, his ankle is much better. Maybe you and Lily would like to join us for a picnic. There's a lovely spot by the lake in the community park here." Mason hesitated. This felt like crossing a line from professional to personal. Reading his expression, Grace added, "Noah has been talking about you all week. He'd love to show Lily his rock collection, and I'd enjoy the company." The vulnerability in that last admission decided him. "That sounds nice. What time?" Grace's smile was radiant. "Is noon too early?" "Noon is perfect." The next day, Mason found himself strangely nervous as he and Lily approached the designated meeting spot. He told his daughter they were meeting a new friend and her nephew for a picnic, careful not to make it sound like anything more. Lily skipped along beside him, excited at the prospect of making a new friend. At 8, she was all gangly limbs and endless curiosity with her father's dark hair but her mother's blue eyes. "Daddy, is Noah nice?" she asked for the 3rd time. "Very nice," Mason assured her. "And he's got an awesome rock collection he wants to show you. I hope he has obsidian. Mrs. Garcia says it comes from volcanoes." They spotted Grace and Noah setting up a blanket under a large oak tree. Noah was testing his ankle, walking in small circles while Grace arranged what appeared to be an elaborate picnic spread. "Mason, Lily," Grace called, waving them over. She looked different today, more relaxed in shorts and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. The casual look suited her. Introductions were made, and within minutes, Lily and Noah were deep in conversation about rocks, the earlier injury forgotten as Noah proudly displayed his collection from a special case he'd brought. "They hit it off," Grace observed, sitting beside Mason on the blanket. "Kids are good that way," he replied. "No pretenses." Grace gave him a curious look. "Do you think I have pretenses?" The directness of the question caught him off guard. "I think everyone does to some extent." "Some more than others. And me," she pressed. Mason considered his words carefully. "I think you keep parts of yourself private, which is your right." Grace nodded slowly. "Fair assessment. For what it's worth, I find it easier to be myself around you than most people." The admission hung between them, creating an intimacy that Mason wasn't sure how to navigate. He was saved from responding by Noah's excited voice. "Aunt Grace, Lily's never been on a boat. Can we take out the paddle boat, please?" Grace laughed. "That's up to Mason, it's his daughter." All eyes turned to him, and Mason found himself agreeing. Soon they were out on the small lake in a rented paddle boat, the children seated between the adults, all four of them working the pedals in an uncoordinated but hilarious effort. The day passed in a blur of laughter, good food, and comfortable conversation. By late afternoon, when it was time to leave, Mason felt a reluctance that surprised him. "We should do this again," Grace said as they packed up the picnic. "I'd like that," Mason replied, meaning it. Over the next few weeks, a pattern emerged. Mason continued working on projects at Grace's house during weekdays. Weekends often included some activity with the children, a trip to the science museum, an afternoon at the community pool, a hiking expedition on a nearby trail. They were becoming a foursome of sorts, though Mason was careful to maintain boundaries, never presuming that these outings were anything more than friendship. One evening, after finishing the home office conversion, the last of Grace's projects, Mason found himself lingering, neither of them seeming eager for him to leave. "I guess that's it," he said finally, packing away his tools. "Unless you've been hiding more projects from me." Grace leaned against the doorframe. "Actually, I have a confession to make." Mason looked up, intrigued. "Oh, some of these projects, they weren't entirely necessary." She met his eyes. "I could have lived with that guest bathroom leak a little longer, and the home office could have waited." "So why the rush?" Mason asked, though he suspected he knew the answer or hoped he did. Grace took a deep breath. "Because I wanted an excuse to see you, to get to know you." The directness of her admission left Mason momentarily speechless. When he found his voice, it came out rougher than intended. "You could have just asked me out for coffee." "Would you have said yes?" she challenged. The struggling handyman getting coffee with the woman from High Point Heights, she had a point. He probably would have made an excuse, convinced the divide between their worlds was too great. "I'm not just the woman from High Point Heights," Grace continued softly, "and you're not just a handyman." Mason set down his toolbox and crossed the room to where she stood. "Then who are we, Grace?" "Because I still feel like I don't fully know you." Grace hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "Have dinner with me tomorrow night, not here at my office downtown. I'll answer any questions you have." Mason studied her face, noting the mix of determination and vulnerability there. "All right," he agreed. "Tomorrow night." The next evening, Mason found himself being escorted by a security guard through the lobby of one of downtown's most prestigious office buildings. He dressed in his best, which wasn't saying much, just dark jeans and a button-down shirt, and felt distinctly out of place among the marble and glass. The elevator took him to the top floor, where Grace waited by a set of double doors emblazoned with a stylized P logo. She wore a tailored pantsuit that should have been intimidating, but somehow just enhanced her natural elegance. "You came," she said, sounding almost surprised. "I said I would." Mason glanced around. "So this is your office?" "One of them," Grace replied, leading him through the doors into a stunning reception area. "Porter International has headquarters in 3 countries, but this is where I spend most of my time." Mason stopped short. "Porter International, the investment firm," Grace nodded. "Founded by my grandfather, expanded by my father, and now run by me." She said it matter-of-factly, without pride or apology. "You're not just wealthy," Mason realized. "You're ridiculous wealthy," Grace supplied with a wry smile. "Yes. Forbes puts me somewhere in their top 100, though I don't pay much attention to those lists." Mason felt slightly dizzy with the revelation. "And you let me refinish your deck," Grace laughed. "You did an excellent job, too." She touched his arm gently. "Does it change how you see me?" It was a loaded question. Mason considered it honestly. "It's a lot to process. But no, not fundamentally. You're still the woman who cares deeply for her nephew, who made my daughter feel special, who brings me coffee exactly how I like it without being asked." Relief washed over Grace's features. "Good, because I've been worried about telling you. In my experience, money changes how people interact with me. It's why I keep certain details vague when meeting new people." "I get that," Mason said, though in truth, he couldn't fully understand the complexities of navigating relationships with that level of wealth. Grace led him further into the office suite, to a private dining room where a table was set for 2, complete with candles and fresh flowers. A chef appeared briefly to describe the menu before discreetly withdrawing. This is a lot, Mason commented as they sat down. Too much, Grace asked, looking concerned. Mason shook his head. Just different. My idea of a fancy dinner is the Italian place that gives you the little mint with the check, Grace laughed. I love those places too. This is just, I wanted tonight to be special, because I'm not just revealing my financial situation. I'm telling you that I've fallen for you, Mason Keating. The directness of her declaration left him momentarily stunned. When he didn't immediately respond, Grace continued, words tumbling out quickly. I know it's fast. I know there are complications, our different backgrounds, the children, your ex-wife, my ridiculous schedule. But these past weeks have been the happiest I've had in years. When I'm with you, I'm not Grace Porter, CEO, I'm just Grace. Mason reached across the table and took her hand. I've fallen for you too, he admitted, but I've been fighting it because, well, look at us. He gestured to the opulent room around them. This is your world. Mine is a 2-bedroom apartment with a leaky faucet I haven't had time to fix. That's just geography, Grace insisted. Just circumstances. They don't define who we are together. Don't they? Mason asked gently. Your life comes with obligations, expectations. I'm a divorced dad who just landed his first decent job interview in months. Grace's eyes lit up. You got an interview. That's wonderful. With whom? Brighton Engineering, Mason replied. It's not a sure thing, but it's a start. They're good, Grace nodded. I know the founder. Mason immediately tensed. Grace, promise me you won't interfere. If I get this job, I need to know it's because I earned it, not because you pulled strings. She held up her hands. I wouldn't dream of it. Your career is yours. I respect that. Mason relaxed slightly. Thank you. That means a lot. The dinner progressed, the conversation flowing easily from serious topics to light-hearted ones. Grace shared stories of growing up with wealth but parents who insisted on hard work and responsibility. Mason talked about his childhood in a working-class neighborhood, his early marriage and its dissolution, and his dedication to giving Lily stability despite the challenges. By dessert, Mason felt a shift had occurred. The revelation of Grace's true financial status was significant, but it hadn't fundamentally changed the connection between them. If anything, the honesty had strengthened it. So, Grace said as they lingered over coffee, where do we go from here? Slowly, Mason suggested. One day at a time. There's a lot to figure out, Grace nodded. I can do slow. She reached for his hand again, as long as we're moving forward together. The following weeks were a careful dance of integration. Mason got the job at Brighton Engineering, starting as a project manager with a salary that, while modest by Grace's standards, represented a significant improvement for him. He insisted on continuing to pay his own way, though Grace occasionally won battles over who would treat for dinners or activities with the children. The first time Grace came to his apartment for dinner, Mason spent hours cleaning and worrying about how she would perceive his humble home. To his relief, she seemed perfectly comfortable, complimenting his cooking and engaging Lily in a lengthy discussion about her art projects. You thought I'd be judging your place, Grace observed later, after Lily had gone to bed. Mason shrugged, caught out. It crossed my mind. I grew up with money, but I wasn't raised to be a snob, Grace said firmly. Home is about the people, not the square footage or the zip code. As summer turned to fall, their relationship deepened. They established routines, Sunday brunches with the children, quiet dinners on weeknights when schedules aligned, occasional weekend getaways when Lily was with her mother and Noah with his parents. There were challenges, of course. Grace's high profile meant occasional unwanted attention when they were out together. Mason had to adjust to dating someone whose calendar was managed by an assistant and whose decisions affected thousands of employees. Grace had to learn that Mason's schedule as a single dad meant sometimes plans had to change at the last minute for school events or when Lily was sick. But they navigated these challenges together, finding compromises and building a relationship that honored both their worlds. 6 months after their first dinner at her office, Grace took Mason to a small, secluded beach house she owned on the coast, a modest property by her standards, but one that held special significance as it had belonged to her grandmother. They walked along the shoreline at sunset, hands intertwined, comfortable in silence. Mason felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever. This woman beside him, who could have chosen anyone in the world, had chosen him. Not despite his circumstances, but because of the person he was within those circumstances. "I have something for you," Grace said suddenly, stopping to face him. "You already give me too much," Mason protested gently. "This is different." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn brass key. "This is the key to this house. My grandmother gave it to me when I was 22. She told me to save it for someone special, someone who saw me for who I really was." She pressed it into his palm. "That's you, Mason." Mason stared at the key, understanding its significance. "Grace, I'm not asking you to move in," she clarified quickly. "Not yet anyway, but I want you to know that you and Lily are welcome here anytime. This place is special to me and so are you." Mason closed his fingers around the key, then pulled Grace into his arms. "I love you," he said simply. It wasn't the first time he'd said the words, but they carried a new weight now. "I love you too," she replied, rising on her toes to kiss him. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars appear over the ocean, Mason reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together: a child's injury, a chance meeting in a park, his impulsive offer to help. "What are you thinking about?" Grace asked, curled against his side. "How differently things might have turned out if I hadn't been in the park that day, or if I'd minded my own business." Grace smiled. "I don't believe that. I think we would have found each other somehow." "That's very romantic," Mason teased. "I'm serious," she insisted. "Some connections are inevitable." Mason wasn't sure he believed in destiny, but looking at the remarkable woman beside him, he was willing to consider the possibility. 1 year after their first meeting, Mason proposed on the same bench where he'd first heard Noah's cry. It wasn't an elaborate proposal, just the two of them, early morning, the words coming from his heart rather than a practiced speech. The ring was modest, purchased with his own savings despite Grace's assurances that such things didn't matter to her. Grace accepted with tears in her eyes and laughter in her voice. That evening, they celebrated with a family dinner: Lily and Mason, Grace and Noah's parents, who had become dear friends over the months. Their wedding 6 months later was small by Porter standards, but perfect for them: an intimate ceremony at Grace's beach house, with only close friends and family in attendance. Lily served as flower girl, while Noah proudly carried the rings. As Mason stood beside Grace, exchanging vows with the sound of waves crashing behind them, he marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance meeting in a park to a life intertwined, they had bridged their different worlds to create something new together. "I never expected you," he said during his vows, "but now I can't imagine my life without you." Grace, radiant in a simple white dress, squeezed his hands. "The best things in life are often unexpected," she replied, "like hearing a child cry in a park and finding your heart." After the ceremony, as they danced under the stars with Lily and Noah joining in, creating their own chaotic version of a family dance, Mason knew with absolute certainty that wealth had nothing to do with the riches he'd found in Grace's love and the family they were building together. They were from different worlds, yes, but they had created a new one where a struggling dad who had once helped a woman carry her injured nephew had found not just a millionaire, but the love of his life.